In this video, I'm going to show how to place the starter on this Lexus IS250. This will be located behind your driver's side exhaust manifold, and if you have the all-wheel drive model, you will have to remove that manifold to get to the starter. If you have the rear-wheel drive model, there are a lot of shortcuts that you can take to get to it without removing that manifold. But once again, this is all-wheel drive. I'll show you the full procedure. Let's get started. For this job, we have to disconnect the exhaust. So we're gonna start at the back here, disconnect the mid pipe or the resonator pipe from the tailpipe. There are a couple supports we need to remove, and then we'll move further to the front, disconnect O2 sensors and then the manifolds. But that is why I'm starting here, is because we need to make space here to be able to pull the manifold backwards. Let's start by disconnecting the rearmost bracing. You'll find two 12mm bolts on each end. Remove them both. All right, that one broke. That happens. I'm going to use some heat and heat up the mounting nut over here in order to try to avoid breaking the second one. All right, saved that one. A little bit further forward, another small bracing, also 12mm headed bolts. We need to pull the O2 sensors out of the pipe so we can have some more wiggle room with the pipe itself. Both of them go up and into the floor, so I'm not going to bother unplugging them. So what I will do is just pull their grommets out of the floorboard, and especially on this passenger side one that's a little bit shorter, this will give me some extra wire so I can spin this without actually twisting the wire too much. So get a socket that can go inside here. It's a special O2 sensor socket. We'll break it free and remove it. Okay, once it's broken free, you might be able to spin it by hand. It doesn't have too many threads in here. There it goes. We'll just let this hang, but just be careful, you don't want to damage it. The one on the driver's side is the same style sensor, but it's closer to the frame rail, and I cannot get my socket in there, so even if I were to unthread it, it would have to be after the pipe is lowered. At that point, the pipe not being supported, it will be fairly difficult. So, because this has a very long wire, I'm going to just unclip it, and we'll set the exhaust to the side very carefully without putting any pressure on this wire. I can bungee cord the exhaust back up to the car, but pushed back or to the side. So grab a trim tool and unclip the wire from the body. All right, that gives us a lot of slack. Now let's disconnect the resonator pipe from the muffler pipe. These are 14mm headed spring bolts. I'm going to heat this up right from the beginning. I'm not even going to try to take this off without any heat because I don't want to break this hardware. Although it's rusty, I can still definitely reuse this. So I'm going to try to save it once again, applying heat over here, 14mm socket here, and just try to separate this. There's one. Before disconnecting the other bolt, I will support this pipe as it has no hangers. The hangers are after this connection point. Just a little bit of pressure. I'm using a pole jack because I'm on a lift, but if you're on the ground, just use a floor jack until you're ready to drop down the exhaust. All right, let's lower our support a little bit. Try to get these two to come apart. Perfect. I'll leave the support here. In front of the transmission pan, you'll see two 14mm headed bolts. They hold on the exhaust retainer bracket, and we'll have to remove both of these. All right, We now have to separate the manifold pipes from the exhaust pipe. These are supposed to be 12mm headed bolts with some mounting nuts. In my case, they are extremely rusted, which is common. The first thing I'll try to do is find the tightest possible socket that'll fit on this bolt. That will allow me to get a good grip on it. Then I will heat up the mounting nut, again with my induction heater, and try to break this free. Looks like the 12mm still fits fairly well, so I'm gonna go with that. Broke it free, that's promising. Looks like we have to hold it. I'll be using some locking pliers to hold it, as no wrench will still fit on that. Okay, looks like I got it. Let's do the same to this one. All right, we got one side disconnected. Do the same exact thing to the other pipe. Okay, I got this one hot. Once I take this out, the center bracket will also fall off. So just so you know, be ready to catch it or put a couple of these bolts back in. All right. I have the exhaust pipe supported with a bungee cord here, so as I remove the last mounting nut, it doesn't drop down too far. All right, let's grab this pipe now and move it down and out of our way. Once again, we can't fully remove it unless you unplug the other O2 sensor, but you'd have to remove the driver's seat for that, so I'm just gonna skip that. Here's how I ended up supporting it. I have a bungee cord at the front. Of course, the pipe is pushed all the way back, and a bungee cord at the rear. If you're on the ground on jack and jack stands doing this job, you can just leave the exhaust on the ground. There will be plenty of slack in the O2 sensor, but because I'm on a lift, I have to be able to lift the car up with the exhaust still attached. Now on to disconnecting the drive shaft. Once again, because it's all-wheel drive, we have to do this to make space. I marked it with 3 lines here where it bolts on, so I can line it up exactly how it was before. And additionally, I put an R for rear so that I can put it facing the correct orientation and not backwards when I put this back on. Often, these are balanced, and although it's unlikely that it will vibrate and be out of balance if you put it on backwards or the wrong way, sometimes it happens. So I want to make sure it goes on exactly how it came off. I'm going to use a 6mm hex socket and remove all of these bolts. The vehicle should be in neutral to do this so that you can spin the drive shaft easily, although the front drive shaft actually might be disconnected if the vehicle is off, as the all-wheel drive system will only kick on when it thinks it needs to grip the front wheels. So it is possible that you might be able to spin this even in park, but I put mine in neutral just to be safe. On this last one, there will be a bracket that comes off with it as well. To separate this, I'm going to use my Allen socket that I used before, stick it right into one of the non-threaded holes. That'll push the drive shaft out. There we go. Now with this removed, just so it doesn't fall out while I'm undoing the front, I'm going to bolt it back on just with one bolt, a few threads, only enough to secure it on here temporarily. All right, that's enough. At least it won't fall. Let's do the same on the front. Unlike the back on the transfer case, the front differential only has one access hole that is not threaded. That's what I'll use to try to push the CV joint of the drive shaft out of here. Now, it's kind of tight in here, so we'll have to find something that fits, but same idea, just push it right through. I'm going to use a bolt that fits in here, try to press on that. All right, so that popped out. Try to walk it out the rest of the way with a pry bar. There we go. Now this bolt that we partially threaded in on the rear, we can remove and pull the drive shaft off. There we go. To get some more space for the manifold, which is next, I want to remove this heat shield. Just a 10mm mounting nut here and a 10mm headed bolt at the front. Spray it with a little bit of rust penetrant. All right, we'll set that aside. Now we're gonna move up top. On the passenger side of the engine bay near the firewall, you'll find your battery. And on the left side of the battery, as you're looking at it, you'll see the negative terminal. With a 10mm socket or wrench, loosen this mounting nut up. With it loosened up, that should release the terminal off of the battery. Take it off and tuck it to the side where it can't make connection with the terminal. We're going to have to remove a couple things in this area so we can get better access to our exhaust manifold bolts. The first thing we'll remove is this relay box. Use a 10mm socket and remove both the bolt and the mounting nut. Now you can push this to the side. This ground wire also has to be removed. I'm going to unbolt it from the valve cover with a 10mm socket. Now for the bracket, I want to unbolt the entire bracket. There's a 10mm that holds it on right down here. A little hard to see. I'm going to put a ratchet on it and remove that with the ground wire altogether, so I won't be unbolting it from here. I'll take this out. To make some more space to work here, I'm going to unbolt this wire, which goes to the alternator, and I'll also unbolt the alternator connection point. The battery's already disconnected, of course, for our starter, so it doesn't matter that we're doing this. This will be a huge advantage because it'll create a lot more space for us to unbolt the manifold through. So with a 10mm socket, remove this mounting bolt for this bracket. And then down here, pull the boot off of the alternator wire. And with a 10mm socket, unbolt that mounting nut. Try not to drop it, of course. We'll pull the wire up with the mounting nut. Take the mounting nut off. And now we can set our wire aside, out of the way. Just like this, which gives us a lot more space for our tool for the manifold. Now follow this oxygen sensor wire. It goes to the back of the head. We'll have to unplug the electrical connector. You'll see the connector right over here. I know this is a view from behind or underneath, but it's the best I could give you so you could see what I'm doing while I'm actually undoing it. This right here is going to be the locking tab for the connector that you have to press while you pull on the connector itself, and that's going to be the most challenging part, is to actually press and pull at the same time. All right, so a long pick is the answer. So you can have one hand on the wire and the other hand on the pick. Now here's the hardware that's below the exhaust manifold. There are 3 12mm mounting nuts with some studs. I want to remove these first because they're harder to get to, and I don't want to leave them for last so that the manifold doesn't fall on my tool as I'm unbolting them. A 12mm deep socket with a short extension and a long ratchet is the key to get all of these off. Okay, there it is. I'm going to also break this one free while I'm at it, since I have my ratchet in my hand. And I'll just zip them both off with my air ratchet. out that last one. So now we just have to do the ones that are on top, 3 more. Same for these, gonna break them all free and then zip them off with my air ratchet if it fits, if not, by hand. All right, well, as you can see, the manifold separated from the head. That's perfect. So now, to take it out, we actually have to go back underneath because it comes out through the bottom. Now back underneath, grab onto the manifold, carefully turn it and twist it and pull it out. Be careful of that oxygen sensor so that you don't damage it. There it is. We'll set this aside. While we're at it, remove the gasket. Set it aside. These multi-layer steel gaskets can be reused if they're in good condition. If yours is in poor shape, you're going to want to replace it, of course. And I recommend sourcing another multi-layer steel gasket. Mine looks all right. I'm just going to clean it up with a wire brush, and I will be reusing it. Of course, there's quite a bit of cleaning to do on the head side, but let's get that starter replaced first, and then we'll worry about all the cleaning. Now reach down to the starter. You'll see this connector right here. We have to press on that little tab, pull back on the wire simultaneously to disconnect the signal wire to the starter. This might be easier done with a little pry bar that you can press with and then something to pull it with. Perfect. We'll get this out of the way. This is the main power wire to the starter. Although you could disconnect it now, it will be a lot more difficult than if we just unbolt the starter. It's got 2 14mm headed bolts holding it on. Now remove the 2 14mm headed bolts that hold the starter on. And the second. Now using a pry bar and a hammer, tap the starter if it's stuck on there. A lot of times it is, just from corrosion buildup. That way it can break free and get pulled off of the transmission or, from the engine. There it goes. Now take it, and you're gonna have to kind of wiggle it around to get this to come out. We need more slack in that main wiring harness, so right here on the back of the engine, I'm going to unclip it from its retainer with a pocket screwdriver. Pry this. Open it up. Pull this out. All right, now that's better. Now, at this point, we're gonna have to remove this stud with an E8 inverted torque socket, and that is so that the starter can go straight up. Now you can grab onto the starter and lift it up. All right, there it is. Tilt it, twist it, and now we can take care of the main electrical connector. So with a pocket screwdriver, pop this cap off. And with a 12mm socket, remove the mounting nut. Separate this. All right, and there is your starter. Inspect the surface where the starter mounts. Mine is in great shape. It's not corroded or dirty or anything like that. And if it was, you would want to clean it up so that the starter not only can seat properly, but that's how it grounds out. So you want to make sure that it has a good connection there. Now grab the new starter and let's get it connected onto the main power wire. Slide this on. All right, just like that, except you have to make sure that you put it in the same orientation as it was before. And it was at an angle like that. So basically, if you were to draw a line straight down through this terminal, it has to be facing this connection. Now, One other note is to make sure that there's no corrosion on here. Mine is in great shape. There's no corrosion, no debris, so I'm putting it right back on. If yours had corrosion, try to pry this whole cover off and sand it down. You want to have fresh metal exposed there so that it can actually transfer all the amperage properly. Otherwise, you're going to be taking the starter back out again if the vehicle doesn't start. Let's bolt this on. We'll snug it up. If you're doing this by hand, about 1/8 of a turn. These studs are soft and they can break inside the alternator. I just gave it a couple taps with my impact driver, so it's not tightened down a whole lot, but it is snug. Now my cap broke, unfortunately, but it still clips on, so I'll be putting it right back on. Just like that. This just protects it from debris and water splashing up at it. Now let's take the starter and bring it back into position and just try to find the angle that it wants to be at to go back into the transmission. Be careful of this wire, you don't want to pinch it or anything like that. All right, looks like I got it in. It is fully seated. It's not going to stay until we bolt it on, so let's do that next. Try to get one of the bolts started in. All right, that one's started. So we'll get the other one in. Careful with how you do this, but you can gently tug on the wire to hold this in. All right, both are in. Let's snug them up. Torque these bolts to 43 foot-pounds. All right, we'll double check them. That is torqued down. Now from up top, let's plug in the signal wire for the starter. Make sure that's locked in. You do not want this to come undone after you're done. So just pull on it a little bit. If a little bit of force does not pull it out, that means it is fully locked in, or of course if you heard it click, you're good to go. Now I have to clean all of this carbon buildup. I'm going to use a gasket scraper and a razor blade, kind of a combination of both, and just scrape this away. Keep in mind, this is an aluminum head. It is very soft material, and you don't want to gouge it. You don't want to sand it off if you're using anything that's very coarse or abrasive. It needs to stay flat. If you want to, or if you need to, you can pull out the rest of the studs. I won't, because my surface isn't really that bad except for where the carbon buildup is. So I'm just going to focus on those areas. But if you need to remove the rest of the studs, the same inverted torque socket we used earlier, an E8, will do the trick. Going to rinse it down with some brake parts cleaner to ensure that there are no oils on there. And wipe it down with a clean rag. Now we can get the stud back in, clean it up if needed. Mine wasn't too bad. We'll tighten it up and snug it. You don't have to tighten this too much, because what happens is when you put the mounting nut on this end, it'll actually put pressure on the entire stud, and therefore all of the threads will have equal pressure on them. So once we torque the manifold, this being snug is going to be plenty tight on both sides. Okay, I'll give it a little extra, and that is perfect. We'll get our gasket back on. I'm reusing mine, but if you have a new one, just slide it right over. And don't worry about getting it on the wrong way, because you can't. Actually, it's directional, and if it doesn't fit, that's because you have it on backwards. This is going to stay on like this. It's basically kind of just caught on the threads, which is perfect, because now we can slide our manifold right in. I also cleaned up the surface on the manifold where it meets the gasket, and now it's time to get the manifold right back in. Once again, careful of the O2 sensor. slide it onto the studs. And that is on. Back up top, let's bolt the manifold on. Start at least one mounting nut so that you can let go. And then once you have this one started, you can start in the rest of them. I'm going to snug these up, not fully tighten them, but I want the manifold pressed up against the engine block. Otherwise it's not going to stay on properly, so then I can start the bottom ones and then we'll come back and torque them. And now the mounting nuts on the bottom of the manifold, get those back on. Now I found it easiest if you have an extension, a short one, with your 12mm socket on it, a paper towel or a piece of some sort of cloth or paper between the socket and the mounting nut so that the nut can stay secured on there, and then you can drive it down onto the bolt or the stud and start tightening it up. And that one just started onto its threads, which is perfect. All right. All the lower ones are in, so it's time to snug them up. Now the torque for these mounting nuts is 15 foot-pounds. I'm gonna torque all the bottom ones. If I can, I'm gonna try, but typically you're gonna have a harder time reaching them with a torque wrench. If so, just do your best to get them as tight as you can. Obviously not too tight, but 15 foot-pounds is just about 1/8 of a turn after they bottom out and stop spinning. And then I'll go and do the top 3 mounting nuts. I'll be using a swivel to torque these. I know this alters the torque spec a little bit, but I'm not worried about it because 15 foot-pounds is not a lot. All right, that one's tight. We'll move on to the next one. I can't get this center one to torque with the torque wrench, so I'm putting my socket back on my ratchet, just going to snug it up by hand. All right, and now let's torque the last one on the bottom. All right, now for the top ones, unfortunately, because I don't have a swivel head torque wrench or a socket with an adapter that'll fit, I'm going to just tighten them by hand because I can't get my torque wrench in at that angle. So I'm just gonna snug them up really quick. Once again, 15 foot-pounds is not a lot. Some of these are pretty much already tight. All right, those are tight. So let's reach behind, and connecting it should be easier than disconnecting it because all you have to do is press it in. Now you wanna make sure that it's lined up just right. There it goes. It clicked, so that's locked in. Let's get the alternator wire reattached. All right, get that 10mm mounting nut back on it. Make sure the prongs on the alternator wire are inside of their groove. If they are not, it won't seat all the way, it won't make a good connection, and you can damage it. Snug it up. If you're doing this by hand, just about 1/8 of a turn after it bottoms out is plenty. You don't want to over tighten it. Push the boot back over that alternator wire. And let's get this bracket reattached. Bring it close and then put that 10mm headed bolt through. And snug it up. Now let's remount this bracket that holds our relay box as well as the ground cable. Try to do your best to get this bolt started here without dropping the bracket, which can be difficult since you don't have much space. Looks like I got it started. It seems to be snugging up, so I'm going to tighten it up fully now. All right, just give it a quick snug. It is a very small bolt and you don't want to break it. Once you have that tightened up, let's put the ground cable back on the engine block. Make sure that this ground cable is clean, free of debris, oils, or corrosion. Mine is, so I also cleaned up this surface a little bit. It just had some dirt on it. I'm gonna put this right back here. Get that bolt started. Just make it nice and snug. Now get the relay box back over the stud and line it up with that bolt hole. Put the mounting nut back on the stud and put the bolt back in. With those two on, let's snug them up. Careful how much you tighten these because you don't want to crack the plastic. That's it. It's time to get this exhaust shield back, if you took it off, that is. If this area where it mounts is too rusted or corroded and it can't mount anymore, you could either put a large washer on the stud and then put the mounting nut on. That should hold it on. Or you could get a new shield or come up with a different solution. But it is important that this goes here because this exhaust pipe gets really hot and it'll heat up the floorboard. Put the mounting bolt back in. And with both of these started, let's snug them both up. You don't need to make them very tight. Just nice and snug. Make sure it's properly secured and doesn't rattle, otherwise it'll make some horrible noises as you drive down the road. We have to clean up the flange where the drive shaft mounts. Mine is actually in pretty good shape, but I do see some rust that I want to clean up with a wire wheel, so I'm going to try my best to do it. Now, if yours is severely corroded, you want to make sure that it's as clean and as flat as possible, or you will likely get some drivetrain vibrations, especially at higher speeds, if this doesn't mount perfectly. Give this a good rinse with some brake parts cleaner to get rid of any debris and oils that are here. All right, that looks pretty good. What I will do now is coat it with some anti-seize, that way it doesn't corrode in the future. Now the key here is to not get it inside the threaded holes because we will be putting thread locker on the bolts, and anti-seize will prevent the thread locker from doing its job. So just try to get it on the outside of the flange and on this flat mating surface. It is not necessary that you cover the center, by the way. Nothing actually goes there. Try to spin it. If you spin a wheel, it'll spin the flange. All right, now do the same exact thing to the flange on the transfer case side. Now take your drive shaft and put it back where the marks are. So I'm not super worried about it at first. I just want to get it somewhat seated, but then I can spin the flanges and line up my marks. So in the rear here, I have the 3 lines, just like that with the bolt holes. I'll start these bolts in, and then that'll ensure that this won't fall out. Then I'll go to the front and finish lining the front up. As I mentioned previously, all my bolts got cleaned up and I applied some blue thread locker to the ends of the threads. And now I'll start these in. As long as the threaded holes are lined up on the flange, these should start in no problem. And of course, make sure you put this bracket back in. It's got 3 bolts on each. So there's 6 in total per end, which means 2 brackets. Spin this around and get this in. All right, let's snug these up. I'm gonna do this in a cross pattern, by the way. That way I can make sure if this flange and the drive shaft aren't seated properly, tightening these in a cross pattern will pull them together evenly. All right, while we're at it, torque these bolts to 18 foot-pounds. Because I snugged them in a cross pattern, I'm just going to torque them going around in a circle. And to hold the drive shaft from spinning, I'll be using a pry bar and just basically trying to hold it like this as I turn to tighten the bolts. Once again, 18 foot-pounds. Turns out if you hold it on the back side, it's a little bit easier. All right, those are all torqued. 18 foot-pounds is not a lot. Just make them nice and snug with a ratchet. Now let's do all of the same steps to the front. We'll line it up, bolt it on, and torque it. Everything's lined up, so let's get the bolts started. There we go. Now it's fully seated. You got to pay attention to the details and make sure that when you put the bolts in, it actually pulls it all the way in. All right, 18 foot-pounds, here we go. All right, just try your best to hold this. It's going to be a lot more difficult to hold than the rear, but like I said, just do your best. All right, that's all of them. It's time to clean up the exhaust manifold mounting surface where it goes onto the pipe. This is just a bunch of rust and old gasket material here, so we'll have to chip all of this away. Hopefully yours isn't as bad, but still this one is definitely usable, just has to be cleaned up very well. So let's take a chisel and a hammer or even a little pry bar, tap all of this off of here, get it nice and clean and flat, then do the same thing on the other side manifold and on the pipe. Then we can join the two together. This is never going to look great, but this looks good enough to put a gasket on and have it seal up. This is what matters right here, that this surface is flat, clean, and that you have plenty of thickness on the ears of the flange to mount the exhaust back on. Now I'll do the same to the other side manifold, and then we'll move on to the pipe and do the same thing. There is one more mounting point on the exhaust that we have to clean, and that is at the back where the resonator pipe or the mid pipe bolts onto the tailpipe or the muffler pipe. Here I'm going to use a wire wheel on my drill and just clean all this out. Then we'll go to the resonator pipe end, which would bolt on here. We'll remove the old gasket, clean that up, and get it ready for the new gasket. This is the end of the resonator pipe, the other side of where we just cleaned up. Let's pry off this gasket and clean up the surface. With this cleaned up, I'm going to install my new gasket. Just in my case, because I have a pipe that may have a couple pinholes, I see one over here, and overall it's still structurally sound, but it's not in the best of shape for sealing up, I will use some exhaust RTV. This is specially formulated for high temperature, and I will put a thin layer all around the pipe where the gasket goes on, just to cover any imperfections. That way the gasket can seal up properly and I will have no exhaust leaks. With that on, I'm going to place my gasket right over. This is of course a brand new donut gasket. Make sure it fits all the way down. Before we bolt on the exhaust at the front, let's put this exhaust brace back on. That way when we put the bolts through on the flanges, they can just go right through this bracing as well. Start these on by hand. You don't want to cross thread these by accident. They're going into aluminum and it would be easy to do so. Now let's bottom them out. 14mm socket for these. Torque these to 32 foot-pounds. Before the front gets bolted up, let's put the rear in. Just like that. You don't have to bolt it in yet, and I won't, just because it's not quite lined up, but you have to be able to push the exhaust forward and then back in order to get this donut gasket to seat. Otherwise, what you'll end up having to do is unbolt a bunch of hangers from the tailpipe. I installed a new gasket on both of the manifolds. I know this doesn't look good. I put some exhaust RTV on there too because the surface, although clean, isn't flat and even, and I couldn't really get it to be that way, and I want to ensure that this seals up. So to fill in the gaps, Once again, I used exhaust RTV. I recommend that you do the same thing so that you don't have exhaust leaks if this is the case for you. So now, with both gaskets on there, the advantage here is the RTV is actually going to just hold it on, otherwise you'd have to hold it. Let's bolt this pipe back onto the manifold. Also, I have new hardware for these flanges as our old ones were very rusted. Put one bolt in on one side, try to start a mounting nut on it just to hold it in place. And now we can put in the 2 remaining bolts. Let's tighten these bolts up. I have to hold the back side with a wrench. We'll torque these bolts to 29 foot-pounds. And do the same to the other side. All right, for this passenger side oxygen sensor, resecure the wire. And for the driver's side one, thread it back in. Just remember to spin it counterclockwise at first to twist the wire basically the wrong way so that you can then untwist it as it threads in. Okay, just give it about an 1/8 to a 1/4 turn after it bottoms out, just enough to crush that washer in there. That's what's going to seal it up. And because I popped my grommet out of the floorboard, I'm going to put it back in. Press it through and then pull it so it can lock in. Now back at the resonator, or right behind it I guess, let's put the 2 spring bolts back in. Torque these 2 bolts to 32 foot-pounds. Let's put the smaller brace back on the vehicle. It's got a more curved side and a flatter side. The more curved side goes towards the front of the vehicle. The straighter side goes towards the back of the vehicle. Line it up, have a bolt ready. Once you start one bolt, you can let go and start in another. Now start in the other side. Mine had a bolt that broke. It is what it is. That happens. I'm just going to put the 3 back in. Snug it up. Now let's put the bigger brace on that goes on the rear. And I have the bolts that have the larger washer going on for this one. Start them in and snug them up. Snug up the other side as well. This also had a broken bolt. That's okay. Now let's reconnect the battery. It might make a little spark. That's normal. Make sure it's pressed down all the way. And then take your 10mm socket or ratchet and tighten up this mounting nut. I got it snug. I'm going to stop right there. As long as you can't spin this terminal with the mounting nut snugged up, that's plenty tight. If you go any tighter than that, it'll actually stretch this and then it won't make a good connection in the future. Job is done. Start up the vehicle, check for exhaust leaks, and take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.